The photograph arrived on my husband's phone at 7:42 on a Tuesday evening. It showed my hand wrapped around his brother's hand, across a restaurant table, both of us caught in soft amber light, my face turned toward him with an expression that could have been read by anyone who wanted to read it that way, as tenderness. The caption beneath it said 3 words, "Your wife is cheating." I did not know, when I reached across that table 40 minutes earlier, that I was being photographed. I did not know that the entire conversation, the tears, the confession, the trembling hand I had taken out of nothing but reflexive human kindness, had been staged, start to finish, by a man who had spent 11 years waiting for exactly this opportunity. I am going to tell you everything. But first, you need to understand what that dinner actually was, and what it took me almost 2 weeks to fully uncover. My name is Olivia Bennett. I am 34 years old. I run a small but successful catering company in Savannah, Georgia, the kind of business built on weddings and corporate events and the particular, exhausting joy of making other people's important days run smoothly. I have been married to my husband, Marcus, for 6 years. Marcus is 37. He works as a financial analyst for a regional bank, methodical and careful in a way that extends into every part of his life. The way he reviews contracts twice before signing, the way he plans vacations months in advance, the way he has never once, in the 6 years I have known him, raised his voice at me in anger. I want you to remember that about him because it matters enormously for how this story ends. We have a 4-year-old son, Henry, who has his father's calm temperament and my stubbornness in roughly equal measure. We live in a beautiful home on Wilmington Island, a sprawling property with a wide front porch and live oaks draped in Spanish moss, the kind of house that looks, from the road, like something out of a postcard. That house is the entire reason any of this happened. The house belonged to Marcus's family for 3 generations. His grandfather built the original structure in the 1950s. His father, Harold Bennett, expanded it significantly in the 1980s, turning it into the sprawling, beautiful property it is today. Harold died 4 years ago after a long illness, leaving behind his wife, Eleanor, and his 2 sons, Marcus and Marcus's younger brother, Connor. I need to tell you about Connor now because everything that follows depends on understanding exactly who he is. Connor is 33 years old. He has always been, by every account I have heard from people who knew the family for decades, the more charming of the 2 brothers, quicker with a joke, more comfortable in a crowded room, the kind of person who makes an immediate impression and then, slowly, over longer acquaintance, reveals a hollowness underneath the charm that the first impression never warned you about. Connor has never held a job for longer than 2 years. He has gone through 3 failed business ventures that I know of, each one funded partially by his parents, each one ending in a way that somehow always became someone else's fault. He has never married, never settled, never built anything that lasted, and somewhere in the years before I knew the family, he developed a very specific, very persistent belief that he had been wronged. That belief centered entirely on the house. When Harold Bennett died, his will left the Wilmington Island property to Marcus and me jointly. Not to Marcus alone, not split between the brothers, but specifically and explicitly to both of us, as a married couple. Harold had written into the will, in language his attorney later confirmed was unusually direct, that he was leaving the house to Marcus and his wife, Olivia, in recognition of the stable life and family they have built, which this home should continue to support. Connor received a substantial cash inheritance instead. Generous, by any reasonable measure. Enough to start a real business, buy a home of his own, build an actual life. He did not see it that way. He saw it as theft. I learned the full depth of Connor's resentment slowly, over the years, in small fragments that I dismissed individually and only later understood as a pattern. The comments at family dinners about how some people just get handed things. A particular tension whenever the house came up in conversation. The way he would walk through the rooms during visits with an expression that looked, in retrospect, less like nostalgia and more like inventory. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, had always been warm to me on the surface, affectionate at family gatherings, generous with compliments about Henry, the picture of a doting grandmother. But there was a current beneath that warmth that I had felt without ever being able to name, a watchfulness that I had attributed, for years, to simple maternal protectiveness. I now understand it was something else entirely. But on the Tuesday evening the story actually begins, I knew none of this with any clarity. I knew only that Connor had called me directly, not Marcus, specifically me, and asked if I could meet him for dinner. He said it was important. He said he needed to talk to someone he trusted and that he didn't feel comfortable bringing it to Marcus directly yet. It's about Mom, he said, his voice tight with what sounded, at the time, like genuine distress. I think something might be wrong with her health. I don't want to alarm Marcus until I know more, but I need to talk it through with someone. I should have been suspicious. I want to be honest about that now, looking back. But Connor had never given me a direct reason for suspicion before. Only a general, low-grade unease I had never examined closely. And the request itself seemed reasonable. A man worried about his mother, reaching out to his sister-in-law because he trusted her judgment, wanting to think things through before alarming his brother unnecessarily. I agreed to meet him. I told Marcus I was having dinner with Connor to discuss a family matter, which was true, as far as I understood it at the time. Marcus, trusting and unsuspecting, simply said, "Tell him I love him," and went back to helping Henry with his bath. I drove to the restaurant Connor had chosen, a quiet, dimly lit Italian place downtown, the kind of restaurant with soft lighting and private booths, which I did not think twice about at the time and have thought about extensively ever since. Connor was already seated when I arrived, a glass of wine in front of him, his expression carefully arranged into something that looked, convincingly, like worry. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing briefly as I sat down across from him. "Of course," I said. "What's going on with your mom?" He hesitated. He looked down at his wine glass, turned it slightly, and then looked back up at me with an expression I now understand was rehearsed, practiced, performed with real skill. "Olivia," he said, "there's something else I need to talk to you about. It's not actually about Mom." "Okay," I said, confused. "What is it?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then his eyes, and I want to describe this precisely because I have replayed it so many times since, filled with what appeared to be genuine tears. His voice, when he spoke again, was thick and unsteady. "I've been in love with you since before you and Marcus got married," he said. "I want to tell you exactly what I felt in that moment because I think it matters for understanding everything that came after. I did not feel flattered. I did not feel conflicted. I felt, immediately and completely, a kind of stunned horror. The specific revulsion of hearing something deeply inappropriate spoken aloud by someone I had spent 6 years considering family. "Connor," I said. "Stop." "I know how this sounds," he said, his voice cracking further, tears now visibly running down his face. "I know I shouldn't be saying any of this, but I've held it in for 6 years, Olivia, and I can't anymore. Every family dinner, every holiday, watching you with Henry, watching you build this life with my brother, I've been dying inside." He reached across the table. His hand closed around mine. I want to be completely honest about this moment because it is the moment everything pivoted on. I did not pull my hand away immediately. I am not proud of that hesitation, though I have come to understand, with time and reflection, exactly why it happened. Connor was crying, genuinely and convincingly, in a public restaurant. My instinct, the same instinct that makes me, in any situation, reach towards someone who appears to be in real pain, responded before my conscious mind had fully processed what he had just said. I took his hand for perhaps 3 seconds, a reflexive, almost involuntary gesture of comfort toward a person who appeared, in that moment, to be suffering. Those 3 seconds were exactly what he needed. I pulled my hand back almost immediately, the horror of what I had just heard catching up to the instinct that had briefly overridden it. "No," I said, my voice sharp now, cutting through whatever performance was still unfolding across the table. "Absolutely not, Connor. I have never thought of you that way. Not once, in 6 years. And what you just said to me is completely inappropriate. You are my husband's brother. Olivia, please, just hear me out." "There is nothing to hear out," I said, standing up from the table. My hands were shaking, though my voice, I am proud to say, did not. "I don't know what you think this conversation was supposed to accomplish, but it's over. I'm leaving." And I think you need to seriously examine why you thought this was an acceptable thing to say to me. I left the restaurant. I sat in my car in the parking lot for several minutes, my heart pounding, replaying the conversation, trying to understand what I had just witnessed. Connor had always been strange around the edges of our family relationship, but this felt like an entirely different category of behavior, something I had no framework for processing. I drove home. I did not call Marcus from the car because I wanted to tell him in person, carefully, in a way that wouldn't alarm him while he was driving or distract him at an inopportune moment. I wanted to sit down with him, explain exactly what had happened, and figure out together how to handle what was clearly a serious problem with his brother. I had no idea, driving home that night, that a photograph had already been sent to Marcus's phone 40 minutes before I even left the restaurant parking lot. I had no idea that by the time I walked through my own front door, my husband already believed, based on a single carefully framed image and 3 devastating words, that I was having an affair with his brother. Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table when I came in. Henry was already asleep upstairs. Marcus had managed the bath and bedtime alone, which was not unusual, but something about the stillness in the kitchen, the particular quality of his posture, told me immediately that something had gone wrong. His phone was on the table in front of him, face up. "Marcus," I said. He looked up at me. His expression was something I had never seen on his face before in 6 years of marriage, not anger, exactly, but a kind of devastated confusion, the look of a man trying to reconcile 2 completely incompatible realities at the same time. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course," I said, sitting down across from him, my own confusion building. "What's going on?" He turned the phone around and slid it across the table. I looked at the screen. The photograph showed exactly what I had been doing 40 minutes earlier, my hand around Connor's, both of us under soft restaurant lighting, my face turned toward him in an expression that, captured in that single frozen moment, looked nothing like what it had actually been. Beneath the photograph, the message read, "Your wife is cheating." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "Marcus," I said, "this is not what it looks like. I can explain exactly what happened." "Please," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled, but I could hear something underneath it that I had genuinely never heard from him before. Real fear. The fear of a man who trusted his wife completely and was now confronting evidence that seemed to suggest he had been wrong too. "I need you to explain it to me right now." I told him everything. The call from Connor about supposedly being worried about Eleanor's health. The restaurant. The sudden, jarring confession of love. The hand I had taken reflexively, for 3 seconds, in response to what had appeared to be genuine tears. Marcus listened without interrupting, his face unreadable, his hands flat on the table. And that is exactly when the front door opened. Connor walked in without knocking, something he had always done. Treating the house with a familiarity that I now understood came from believing it should have been his all along. "Marcus," Connor said, his voice carefully pitched to sound urgent, breathless, as though he had rushed over the moment he learned something was wrong. "I need to talk to you. Please, before you do anything." "Connor," Marcus said slowly, standing up from the table. "What is going on?" Connor's eyes filled, almost instantly, with tears, the same fluent, convincing tears I had watched him produce in the restaurant less than an hour earlier. He looked at Marcus, then at me, and then back at Marcus with an expression of profound, performed anguish. "Please don't hurt her," Connor said. "I know how this looks. I know what the photo looks like. But this isn't her fault, Marcus. We love each other. We've been fighting it for years, but we love each other, and I came here tonight because I couldn't let you find out from a stranger's photograph instead of from us." The room went completely, absolutely silent. I stared at Connor, my mouth open, the full scope of what I was witnessing finally beginning to assemble itself in my mind. He was not confessing a real feeling that had spiraled out of control. He was performing a script, one final, devastating act in a plan that had clearly been constructed with deliberate, calculated precision. "That is a lie," I said, my voice rising now, the shock giving way rapidly to fury. "That is an absolute, complete lie, and you know it, Connor. I have never had feelings for you. I have never had a single moment of attraction or interest. Tonight, you called me under the pretense of being worried about your mother's health. You sat me down, you cried, you confessed something completely inappropriate, and I refused you immediately and left. That is the entire truth of what happened. Olivia, please, Connor said, his voice still trembling with manufactured emotion. You don't have to protect Marcus's feelings by denying this. We can be honest now. I am being honest, I said. You are the one lying. Marcus stood very still between the two of us, his eyes moving from his brother to his wife and back again, his face a careful, controlled blank that I could not read at all. Marcus, I said, turning to him fully. I need you to believe me. I have given you no reason in 6 years to doubt me, and I am telling you, completely and without hesitation, that everything Connor just said is a fabrication. Marcus did not respond immediately. He looked at Connor for a long moment, then at me, then back at the phone still sitting on the table between us. I need both of you to leave me alone for a moment, he said finally, his voice quiet but absolute. Connor, go home. I will call you tomorrow. Marcus. Go home, Connor. Marcus's voice did not rise, but something in its flatness left no room for argument. Connor left. I watched the front door close behind him with a strange, sick feeling settling in my stomach. Not relief, because nothing had actually been resolved, but the particular dread of understanding that something much larger and more orchestrated than a single dinner had just begun unfolding around me. Marcus turned to me. I need to think, he said. Just for tonight. I'm not saying I believe him over you. I'm saying I need to think clearly, and I can't do that with both of you in the same room arguing. He came over and wrapped his arms around me. Briefly, a gesture that felt less like reassurance and more like a man trying to hold onto something solid while everything around him spun. Then he went upstairs to our bedroom and closed the door, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen with his phone, the photograph, and a growing, cold certainty that none of this had happened by accident. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the living room couch, going through everything in my mind with the same careful, methodical attention I bring to planning a complicated catering event, examining every detail, every timing inconsistency, every piece of the evening that did not add up. Connor had called me specifically, not Marcus. He had chosen a dimly lit restaurant with private booths, the kind of setting that would produce exactly the visual ambiguity needed for a photograph to be misread. He had cried with a fluency that, looking back now, felt rehearsed rather than spontaneous. And the timing of the photograph, sent to Marcus's phone within minutes of the moment I briefly held Connor's hand, meant that someone had been positioned, deliberately, to capture that exact instant. Someone had been watching. Someone had taken that photograph and sent it immediately, with a caption designed for maximum damage. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about every strange, watchful moment over 6 years that I had dismissed as ordinary maternal protectiveness. I thought about comments Connor had made over the years about the house, about fairness, about feeling like he had been the family's forgotten son. I thought about Harold's will, specifically naming me, specifically excluding Connor from any claim to the property. By 4 a.m, sitting alone in the dark of my own living room, I understood with growing, sickening clarity exactly what this was. This was not about love. This had never been about love. This was about the house. I spent the next 2 weeks in a strange, suspended state, sharing a home with my husband while a question hung between us that neither of us fully addressed directly. Marcus was not cold to me, exactly. He continued helping with Henry, continued the ordinary rhythms of our life. But there was a careful, deliberate distance in him, a man genuinely trying to think his way through an impossible situation rather than reacting in either direction before he had clarity. I respected that, even as it frightened me. Marcus had always been the kind of man who refused to act on incomplete information, and I understood, somewhere beneath my own anxiety, that this same quality, the quality that made him careful and trustworthy in every other part of our life, was now the thing standing between us and a quick, easy resolution, but I could not simply wait. I am not built that way. So while Marcus thought, quietly and carefully, I began investigating just as quietly and just as carefully. I started by calling Priscilla, a longtime family friend who had known Eleanor for over 20 years and had a relationship with her independent of Marcus or Connor, the kind of friendship built on genuine warmth rather than family obligation, which meant Priscilla had no particular reason to protect anyone's secrets. "Olivia," she said, when I called and carefully explained that I needed to ask her something delicate. "Is everything all right?" "I need to ask you something about Eleanor," I said. "And I need you to be completely honest with me, even if it's uncomfortable." "Of course." "Has Eleanor ever talked to you about the house? About how Harold left it to Marcus and me?" There was a long pause on the line. "Olivia," Priscilla said slowly, "I probably shouldn't say this. But yes. More than once, actually. She's never gotten over it. She thinks Harold's will was a mistake, that Connor deserved an equal share of the property, not just the cash. She said, more than once, that she thinks the will should be corrected, though I was never quite sure what she meant by that." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Has she said anything recently?" "In the past few weeks." Another pause, longer this time. "She mentioned something a few weeks ago," Priscilla said carefully. "Something about Connor having a plan to fix things. I assumed she meant legally contesting the will, something like that. I didn't think much of it at the time." I thanked Priscilla. I hung up the phone with my hand shaking, the full shape of the conspiracy beginning to assemble itself with a clarity I had not yet allowed myself to fully accept. I needed more than a second-hand account from a family friend. I needed something undeniable, something that could not be dismissed as hearsay or misunderstanding. 3 days later, I had an opportunity one had not anticipated. I had driven to Eleanor's house to drop off some of Henry's old clothes that she had asked for a children's charity drive she organized every fall. I parked in the driveway, and as I approached the side door, the one I always used, since the family had never been formal about entrances, I heard voices through the open kitchen window. Eleanor's voice. And Connor's. I stopped walking. I stood very still beside the house, my heart pounding, and I listened. "Worked exactly the way we planned," Connor was saying. "Marcus is already doubting her. I could see it in his face. He hasn't called me back, which means he's actually thinking about it instead of just dismissing it outright." "You need to be patient," Eleanor said, her voice carrying a careful, strategic calm that I had never once heard from her before. "Marriages don't end over one photograph. You need to keep pushing. Keep reminding him of the doubt. If they divorce, the house becomes part of the settlement, and your father's will only protected Olivia as Marcus's wife. If she's not his wife anymore." "I know how it works, Mom," Connor said, an edge of impatience cutting through his voice. "I just need a few more weeks. He's already questioning her. I just need him to keep questioning her until it breaks something permanently." I stood frozen against the side of the house, my phone already in my hand. I do not fully remember the decision to start recording. It happened almost automatically, some instinct beneath conscious thought recognizing that this conversation needed to exist as something more than my own memory of it. I recorded almost 4 minutes of conversation. 4 minutes of Eleanor and Connor discussing, with chilling, business-like precision, exactly how they intended to destroy my marriage in order to claim a house that had never legally belonged to either of them. I did not knock on the door. I walked back to my car, my hands shaking so badly I had to sit for several minutes before I felt steady enough to drive. Then I drove home. Marcus was in the kitchen when I arrived, making dinner for Henry, his back to the door when I walked in. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. This man I had built a life with, a man who was, at that exact moment, still carrying genuine uncertainty about whether his wife had betrayed him, and I felt a wave of something that was not quite grief, and not quite rage, but some combination of both. He turned and saw me.
"Hey," he said.
"How was?" I did not let him finish. "I need to talk to you," I said.
"Right now."
"Please sit down." Something in my voice must have communicated the seriousness of what was coming, because he set down the spoon he was holding and turned to face me fully. But before I could say a single word, before I had even fully decided how to begin, Marcus crossed the kitchen and put his arms around me. "Olivia," he said, his voice quiet and steady against my hair. "I need to say something first. I've spent 2 weeks thinking about this, going over every detail, and I need you to know, I believe you. I should have said it sooner, but I needed to actually arrive at it myself, not just say it because it was the easier thing to say. He pulled back slightly, looking at me directly. I can't make sense of why Connor would do this. I've turned it over 100 times, and I can't find a version of it that makes sense to me as a story about love. But I know my wife, and I know that whatever this is, it isn't what that photograph made it look like. I stood there for a moment, completely undone by the timing of what he had just said, the apology and the trust arriving in the exact instant I had walked in to deliver evidence of an entirely different, far more calculated betrayal. Marcus, I said, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear.
Tell me, he said.
I told him everything. Priscilla's account of Eleanor's long-standing resentment about the will. The conversation I had overheard outside Eleanor's kitchen window. I played him the recording. I watched my husband's face as he listened to his own mother discussing, with calculated precision, exactly how she and his brother intended to destroy his marriage in pursuit of a house. I had never seen Marcus's face change the way it changed in those 4 minutes. When the recording ended, Marcus set my phone down very carefully on the counter, as though it had become something fragile, something that needed to be handled with deliberate gentleness, even though the contents of it were the opposite of gentle. Say that again, he said quietly. The part about the will. I played it again. Asterisk, your father's will only protected Olivia as Marcus's wife. If she's not his wife anymore, asterisk. Marcus's jaw tightened. His hands, resting on the counter, had gone completely still in a way that I recognized, after 6 years of marriage, as the physical sign of a man containing something enormous. They were never trying to take you from me, he said slowly, almost to himself. They were trying to take the house. The marriage was just the mechanism. I think so, I said. I think Connor has resented losing the house since the day your father's will was read. And I think your mother has been helping him figure out a way to undo it ever since. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than I had ever heard it. Not raised, not shouting, but carrying a kind of cold, absolute finality that frightened me slightly, even though it was not directed at me. Get Henry's coat, he said. We're going to my mother's house. We arrived at Eleanor's house just after 6 in the evening. Connor's car was already in the driveway. He had apparently come for what I assumed was meant to be a celebratory check-in with his mother, an update on how successfully the plan was progressing. Marcus did not knock. He used his own key, the same way Connor always had, and walked directly into the kitchen, where Eleanor and Connor were sitting at the table with cups of coffee between them, looking entirely too comfortable for two people who had just spent weeks conspiring against the people who loved them most. Connor looked up first. His face shifted immediately from casual ease into something more careful, more alert, the look of a man recalculating a situation in real time. Marcus, he said, I didn't know you were coming by. I have a recording of you and Mom discussing exactly how you plan to break up my marriage to steal the house, Marcus said. His voice was flat, absolutely level. There was no room in it for negotiation. I'm not here to ask you whether it's true. I already know it's true. I'm here to tell you both that it's over. Eleanor's face drained of color. Connor's mouth opened, closed, opened again, no sound emerging. Marcus, sweetheart. Eleanor started. I think you've misunderstood. Don't, Marcus said. The single word cut through her sentence completely. Don't insult me by trying to explain this away. I heard the recording, Mom. I heard you tell Connor that if my marriage ended, the house would come out of any settlement, because Dad's will only named Olivia as my wife. He took a breath, and I watched something in him that had been holding steady for 6 years finally, completely break apart. You used my marriage. You used my wife. You let your own son sit across a restaurant table from her and perform a confession of love that was never real, all so that you could get your hands on a house Dad specifically chose not to leave to you. It was supposed to be his, Eleanor said, her voice rising now, the careful, performed warmth finally giving way to something raw and unguarded. Your father never should have left that house to her. She's not even blood, Marcus. Connor deserved. Connor got a substantial inheritance. Marcus said. Dad gave him everything he was entitled to. What Dad did not give him was permission to spend years resenting a decision that was never his to contest, and he certainly did not give either of you permission to try to destroy my marriage in order to fix what you've decided, on your own, was unfair. Connor finally found his voice. Marcus, listen, it wasn't supposed to go this far. I just thought if you two had some doubt, maybe... Maybe what? Marcus turned to face his brother directly. Maybe we'd get divorced, and you'd swoop in and convince Olivia to give up her claim to the house and the settlement? Did you actually think this through, or did you just assume it would somehow work out in your favor, without you having to consider what it would do to the people you were supposedly fighting for? Connor had no answer. I am done, Marcus said. Both of you. I don't want to hear explanations. I don't want apologies right now because I don't believe either of you are capable of an apology that isn't also, somehow, a justification. He looked between them one final time. I will call you if there is ever a family emergency that genuinely requires it. Otherwise, I do not want to hear from either of you. Not calls. Not visits. Nothing. Marcus, please, Eleanor said, tears now genuine, finally, in a way they had never been when Connor performed his earlier act. I'm your mother. You can't just... I can, Marcus said. And I am... He turned, took my hand, and walked out of the house without another word. I want to tell you what happened in the weeks and months that followed, because I think the resolution of this story matters as much as the betrayal itself. Marcus did not speak to Eleanor or Connor again for the remainder of that year. Not at Thanksgiving, which we spent quietly at home, just the three of us, with a turkey I made too large for our small family and a stillness in the house that felt, paradoxically, more peaceful than any holiday gathering had felt in years. Not at Christmas, which Eleanor attempted to reach out about through a card that arrived and that Marcus read once, silently, before setting it aside without responding. He held that boundary with a consistency that surprised even me. I had expected, somewhere in the months that followed, that the ordinary pull of family obligation would eventually soften his resolve, that holidays, or guilt, or simple exhaustion with the conflict would erode the absolute clarity of that first conversation in Eleanor's kitchen. It did not erode. If anything, it hardened. She tried to take Henry's mother away from him. Marcus told me once, about 4 months after everything happened, when I gently asked whether he had given any thought to reconnecting with his mother for the holidays. Not metaphorically. Not in some abstract sense. She and Connor constructed a plan specifically designed to convince me that my wife had betrayed me, with the explicit goal of breaking up our family so that they could profit from the wreckage. I am not interested in rebuilding a relationship with people who are willing to do that. Eleanor reached out several more times over the following months, through cards, through a mutual cousin who tried, gently, to act as an intermediary, through one phone call that Marcus let go to voicemail and never returned. Each attempt was met with the same calm, immovable response, silence. Connor's attempts were fewer and less persistent, which told me something significant about how much of the original scheme had actually been driven by his resentment versus how much had been engineered, strategically, by his mother. I think Connor had genuinely believed at some point that this plan might actually work, that Marcus and I might divorce, that the house might eventually fall to him, through some legal mechanism neither of us fully understood. When that belief collapsed, his persistence collapsed along with it. I do not know, even now, exactly how Eleanor and Connor have processed the consequences of what they did. I do not particularly want to know. What I know is that Marcus has not allowed his mother to see Henry since that night, a decision that I supported completely, though I understood, even in supporting it, what an enormous and painful decision it was for him to make. She's still my mother, Marcus said once, late at night, several months after everything had happened, in a rare moment when his composure briefly slipped and I saw the full weight of what he was carrying. I know that. I'm not pretending I don't feel something when I think about cutting her out of Henry's life completely. But she chose, deliberately and with real calculation, to try to take my wife and my marriage away from me for a house. I cannot pretend that doesn't change everything about what she's allowed to have access to now. I held him that night. I did not try to talk him out of his decision because I did not think he needed talking out of it. He had arrived at it slowly, carefully, the same way he arrived at every important decision in his life, not through anger, but through the patient, methodical process of someone determining what could actually be trusted going forward, and what could not. I want to tell you about the house itself because I think it deserves to be part of the story, given how central it was to everything that happened. We still live there. The wide front porch, the live oaks draped in Spanish moss, the rooms that Harold Bennett expanded decades ago specifically so that his family would have a place that could hold all of them comfortably for generations. I walk through those rooms now with a different awareness than I had before. I think about Harold, a man I never met, choosing deliberately to leave this house to Marcus and me specifically, not out of any disregard for Connor, but I have come to believe, out of a genuine recognition of who would actually build something lasting within these walls. He was right about that, even though I do not think he could have predicted exactly how violently that recognition would eventually be contested. Henry plays in the backyard now, the same yard where Marcus and Connor played as children, where Harold once stood overseeing the construction of an addition that would eventually become Henry's own bedroom. I think about the strange, layered history embedded in a house like this. Generations of a family's hope and labor and, eventually, in this particular case, generations of a family's fracture as well. But the fracture, I have come to understand, was never really about the house. The house was simply the thing being fought over. The actual fracture had existed for years, quietly, inside Connor's resentment and Eleanor's complicity, long before either of them decided to act on it. What happened that Tuesday evening in a dimly lit restaurant did not create the rot. It simply revealed how deep the rot had already grown. I think often about the 3 seconds in which I held Connor's hand across that restaurant table. I have examined those 3 seconds more thoroughly than almost any other moment in my adult life, turning them over in my mind, questioning what they revealed about my own instincts, wondering whether I should have recognized something false in his performance before my hand ever moved toward his. I have concluded, after a great deal of reflection, that I do not regret those 3 seconds. I responded, in that moment, to what appeared to be genuine human suffering with the same reflexive kindness I would extend to any person crying in front of me, regardless of who they were. That instinct is not a flaw. It is, I believe, one of the better qualities I possess, and I am not willing to let Connor's manipulation of it convince me that compassion itself was the mistake. The mistake belonged entirely to him. The calculation, the staging, the deliberate weaponizing of my own decency against me, none of that was something I created or invited. It was something done to me, carefully and with real malice, by two people who had spent years nursing a grievance that was never actually mine to resolve. I think about Marcus's reaction in the weeks that followed, too. The careful, deliberate way he refused to act until he had genuinely arrived at trust rather than simply performing it for my comfort. I understand now why that 2 weeks of uncertain silence felt so excruciating, and I also understand, with the clarity of distance, why it mattered that he took that time rather than rushing to either conclusion. A man who decides too quickly, in either direction, is a man whose conviction cannot be fully trusted. Marcus arrived at his belief in me slowly, honestly, and because of that, I have never doubted, in all the time since, that his trust is real and durable rather than merely convenient. It has been almost 2 years now since that Tuesday evening. Henry is 6. He asks, occasionally, about his grandmother. The kind of innocent, uncomplicated question children ask when they sense an absence, without understanding its cause. Marcus answers him gently, honestly, in language appropriate for a 6-year-old, that sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love, and that protecting your family sometimes means keeping a careful distance from people who have shown they cannot be trusted with that family's well-being. I do not know if that distance will remain permanent. I think, honestly, that some small part of Marcus hopes, somewhere beneath the resolve, that years from now there might be a path back to some careful, limited version of a relationship with his mother. Not the warm, unguarded relationship he once believed they had, but something smaller and more honest, built on an acknowledgement of what actually happened rather than a pretense that it didn't. That is not where things stand today. Today, the house belongs to us, fully and without contest, exactly as Harold Bennett intended. Today, Marcus and I have a marriage that survived an attack specifically engineered to destroy it, and survived it, I believe, stronger and more clearly defined than it was before, because we know now, with absolute certainty, exactly what we are each willing to fight for. I still catch myself sometimes, walking through the wide rooms of this house, thinking about how close we came to losing all of it, not to a natural disaster, not to financial misfortune, but to the deliberate, patient cruelty of people who had convinced themselves that their resentment justified destroying something that was never theirs to take. It did not work. The house is ours. The marriage is ours. The life we have built within these walls, the one Harold Bennett recognized all those years ago as worth protecting, belongs entirely to us and to no one else. That is the whole of what I have to tell you. That is how a man's careful, patient love and a woman's reflexive, almost involuntary kindness became the exact things a calculating family tried to weaponize against us, and how, in the end, those same qualities were also the things that saved us. We are still here. The house is still standing. And the people who tried to take it from us are standing, now, on the outside of a family they decided, with their own choices, they no longer deserve to be part of. The days before. I want to go back, briefly, to the days leading up to that Tuesday dinner, because I think there were signs I missed that deserve to be told honestly, even though they implicate my own judgment in ways that are not entirely comfortable to revisit. About a week before Connor called me, he had started appearing at our house more frequently than usual. Not dramatically so, a stop by to drop off something for Marcus, an unannounced visit during a Sunday afternoon when Marcus was at the hardware store, a lingering 15 minutes longer than necessary on each occasion. I remember thinking at the time that he seemed to be going through something. He asked me questions about our marriage that felt, in retrospect, oddly probing, how things were going with Marcus, whether we ever fought, whether I ever felt like something was missing. I answered honestly because I had no reason not to. I told him things were good. I told him Marcus and I rarely fought, and when we did, we resolved it quickly. I told him I felt completely secure in our marriage. I understand now that I was, without realizing it, providing him with exactly the information he needed to calibrate his approach, confirming that a direct attack on the marriage's stability would need to come from somewhere unexpected, since the marriage itself showed no visible cracks for him to exploit. I also remember, with some discomfort now, a comment Eleanor made at a family dinner about 6 weeks before everything happened. We were sitting on her back porch, just the two of us, while Marcus and Connor were inside watching a baseball game, and she had asked me, with what seemed at the time like idle curiosity, whether I had ever thought about what would happen to the house if anything ever happened to my marriage with Marcus. I don't think about that, I told her, genuinely confused by the question. Marcus and I aren't going anywhere. Of course, she said, smiling in a way I now recognize as careful, calculated. I just think about these things sometimes. Estate matters. It's important to have clarity. I dismissed the comment entirely at the time. I want to be honest about that because I think it is important not to retroactively claim a clarity I did not actually possess in the moment. I did not suspect Eleanor of anything. I simply found the comment slightly odd and moved on with my evening. Looking back now, with the complete picture available to me, I understand that comment was not idle curiosity at all. It was reconnaissance. Eleanor was testing whether I had any awareness of the will's specific language, any anxiety about my legal standing in the house, any vulnerability she might be able to exploit before deciding on the full shape of the plan she and Connor would eventually execute. I had no such anxiety because I had never needed one. Harold's will had been clear, and Marcus and I had never discussed it as a point of vulnerability because neither of us had ever imagined it would need to be defended. I think about that conversation on the porch often now. I think about how close, careful observation, the kind of patient, methodical attention that Eleanor clearly brought to this entire scheme, can hide in plain sight for months before it ever reveals its true purpose. There is one more moment from this period that I want to include because I think it captures something important about how this entire ordeal rippled outward beyond just Marcus and me. About 3 weeks after the confrontation in Eleanor's kitchen, Henry asked, out of nowhere, while we were eating breakfast on a Saturday morning, "Why don't we see Grandma Eleanor anymore?" Marcus set down his coffee cup. I watched him take a moment, the same careful, deliberate moment he took before any important decision, before he answered. Sometimes, Marcus said slowly, grown-ups make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love and protect. When that happens, the people who got hurt sometimes need some space to keep themselves safe until things can be figured out properly. Did Grandma Eleanor hurt you? Henry asked, with the particular bluntness of a 4-year-old who has not yet learned to soften difficult questions. She tried to hurt our family, Marcus said. Not you directly. But she tried to do something that would have made our family very different and very sad, and I needed to make sure that couldn't happen again. Henry considered this with the serious, focused expression he gets when he's genuinely thinking something through. Is she sorry? I don't know, Marcus said honestly. I think someday, maybe we'll find out. But right now, I need you to know that you and Mommy and our family right here, that's the most important thing in the entire world to me. More important than anything else, including being close with people who don't show, through their actions, that they actually care about protecting us. Henry nodded slowly, the way children do when they've absorbed something they don't fully understand yet, but trust completely, because it came from a parent they trust. Okay, he said. Can I have more pancakes? The conversation ended there, the way conversations with 4-year-olds often do, moving from profound to mundane within the space of a single breath. But I watched Marcus afterward, quietly clearing the dishes, and I understood that this small exchange had cost him something. Explaining to his own son, in age-appropriate language, why his grandmother was no longer part of their life. That was a piece of the consequence that Eleanor and Connor's scheme had created, one that would ripple forward through Henry's childhood in ways none of us could fully predict yet. I think about that breakfast often. I think about how the cruelty of what Eleanor and Connor did was never contained to Marcus and me. It reached forward into the next generation too, shaping, in small and significant ways, what kind of family Henry would grow up understanding himself to be part of. I am grateful, at least, that Marcus chose honesty over evasion in that moment. I think Henry will grow up understanding, eventually and completely, exactly why this happened, not through secrecy or euphemism, but through the same clear, careful truth-telling that Marcus brought to every difficult conversation throughout this entire ordeal. I want to close this part of the story by telling you something I did not fully understand about Marcus until all of this happened, something that I think matters as much as the betrayal itself. I had always known Marcus to be careful, methodical, slow to anger. I had sometimes, in smaller moments over our 6 years of marriage, found that quality slightly frustrating, wishing, occasionally, that he would react more quickly, more passionately, in moments that seemed to call for immediate emotional response rather than careful deliberation. This entire ordeal taught me exactly why that quality matters as much as it does. A man who reacts quickly in either direction is a man whose conclusions can be shaped by whoever presents information most persuasively in the moment. Connor and Eleanor were counting on exactly that kind of man. Someone who would see a damning photograph and immediately, viscerally, believe the worst, acting on that belief before any contradicting evidence had a chance to surface. They did not get that man. They got a husband who, even confronted with what appeared to be devastating proof of betrayal, refused to act until he had genuinely arrived at a conclusion he could trust completely. 2 weeks of uncertainty were agonizing for both of us, but those same 2 weeks were also, I now understand, the exact quality that made it possible for Connor and Eleanor's plan to ultimately fail. They needed Marcus to break quickly. He simply would not. And when the truth finally arrived, undeniable, recorded, impossible to argue away, Marcus did not hesitate at all in his response. The same careful deliberation that had made him slow to condemn me also made him absolute, once he understood the truth, in how he handled his mother and brother. There was no gradual softening, no negotiated partial forgiveness, no attempt to find a comfortable middle ground that might have made family gatherings easier going forward. He simply, completely drew a line, and he has not moved it since. I think that combination, patience before judgment and absolute clarity once judgment has actually been earned, is one of the rarest and most valuable qualities a person can possess. I did not fully appreciate it in my husband until I watched it protect our entire family from a threat I never could have anticipated. I am grateful for it now in a way I don't think I would have been capable of understanding before any of this happened. It is autumn again as I write this. The live oaks around our house are doing what they always do this time of year, staying stubbornly green while the rest of the world shifts color around them, the Spanish moss swaying gently in the cooler evening air that finally arrives in Savannah sometime in late October. Henry is 6 now, taller, full of questions about everything, his calm temperament still intact despite, or perhaps partly because of the careful, honest way Marcus and I have navigated explaining the absence of his grandmother and uncle from his life. Marcus and I are, I believe, stronger than we were before any of this happened. Not because the experience itself was good. It was, without question, one of the most painful periods of our marriage. But because we emerged from it having tested something fundamental about each other and found that it held. He learned that I could be trusted completely, even when presented with evidence designed specifically to suggest otherwise. I learned that he could be trusted to protect our family with absolute, unwavering resolve, even when the threat came from his own blood. I still run my catering company. Business has grown actually in the past 2 years, a strange, almost ironic outcome, given that I spent a significant portion of that time consumed by a crisis that had nothing to do with work at all. I think, somehow, that the clarity I gained about what actually matters in my life translated into a kind of sharper, more confident energy in everything else I do, including my business. The house still stands, wide porch and all, exactly where Harold Bennett built it to stand for generations. Henry plays in the same backyard his father and uncle once played in, blissfully unaware, for now, of how close that backyard came to belonging to someone else entirely, to people who wanted it badly enough to try to destroy everything else in order to get it. I do not know what the future holds for Eleanor and Connor. I do not particularly spend my time wondering. What I know is this. Marcus chose his wife and his son over a lifetime of family obligation that had, in the end, revealed itself to be conditional, calculating, and willing to sacrifice anything in pursuit of property. I chose, that Tuesday evening in a dimly lit restaurant, to trust my own judgment over a stranger's manufactured tears, and to walk away the moment something felt fundamentally wrong, even before I understood exactly why. Both of those choices, made independently by 2 different people on 2 different nights, turned out to be exactly the things that saved our family. We are still here. The house is still ours. And the people who tried to take it from us learned, in the end, that some things are not actually for sale. Not for a house. Not for resentment nursed over years. Not for any price at all. That is the whole of what happened, and the whole of what remains true. 2 years later, in the quiet, settled peace of the life we managed to keep. I want to add one final piece to this story, because I think it provides the kind of formal, undeniable closure that matters for a betrayal of this scale. About a month after the confrontation in Eleanor's kitchen, Marcus decided, on the advice of a colleague at his bank who had gone through something similarly contentious with his own family's estate, to consult with an estate attorney, not to take any legal action against Eleanor or Connor, but simply to fully understand exactly what legal standing they might have ever had, and what protections existed for Henry's and my future regardless of whatever else happened in the family. We met with an attorney named Patricia On, a precise, thorough woman who specialized in estate and family law throughout coastal Georgia. Marcus brought Harold's original will. He brought the recording. He explained the entire sequence of events with the same careful, methodical clarity he brought to everything else. Patricia listened to the recording twice. When it finished the second time, she set down her pen and looked at both of us with an expression of genuine, professional astonishment. "I want to be direct with you," she said. "In 15 years of practicing family and estate law, I have heard about schemes like this. I have read about them in case studies. I have never had a client bring me a recorded confession this clear, this complete, and this damning. Did they have any actual legal standing?" Marcus asked, "Could Connor have ever contested the will successfully?" "No," Patricia said simply. "Your father's will was airtight. Connor received a substantial inheritance that fully satisfied any reasonable claim to the estate. The house was specifically, explicitly designated to you and Olivia. There was never a legal path for Connor to successfully challenge that designation, which is, I suspect, exactly why he and your mother turned to a different strategy entirely. If divorce had occurred, and the house had become part of a settlement negotiation between you and Olivia, there might have been an opening for them to influence how that settlement unfolded, particularly if they could position themselves as offering Olivia a quick, simple way to relinquish her claim to the property in exchange for a faster resolution. So the entire plan depended on convincing me Olivia had betrayed me, Marcus said slowly, working through the logic in real time. Precisely, Patricia said. It was never really about love or jealousy or anything emotional in the way it was presented to Olivia at that dinner. It was a calculated attempt to manufacture marital instability specifically because marital instability was the only avenue through which they could ever realistically gain access to the property. I sat with that confirmation for a long moment. There is something different about hearing a stranger, a professional with no emotional investment in our family's outcome, confirm, in plain, clinical language, exactly the conspiracy you have already pieced together yourself. It does not change the facts, but it changes something about how solidly those facts settle into place, how completely they stop feeling like a private suspicion and start feeling like an established truth. Is there anything we need to do now? Marcus asked. Legally, I mean. To protect Olivia, to protect Henry, going forward. Patricia reviewed the will once more. Honestly, she said, your father did an excellent job protecting both of you from the very beginning. I would simply recommend updating your own estate planning now that you have Henry, to make sure the house and your other assets are clearly designated for his future as well. But in terms of anything related to Connor or Eleanor's actions, there's no further legal action necessary because there was never any legal vulnerability for them to actually exploit. They simply didn't understand that. They believed a marital crisis would create an opening that, legally speaking, never actually existed. We left her office that afternoon with a strange, complicated relief of understanding that the entire elaborate scheme, the staged dinner, the manufactured tears, the carefully timed photograph, had been constructed around a legal misunderstanding from the very beginning. Connor and Eleanor had convinced themselves that destroying our marriage would open a door that had, in fact, never existed at all. I think about that often. The cruelty they were willing to inflict, the relationships they were willing to permanently sacrifice, all in pursuit of an outcome that careful legal counsel would have told them, from the very beginning, was never actually achievable. Marcus updated our estate planning within the month, formally and clearly establishing Henry's future inheritance of the property, removing any remaining ambiguity about what would happen to the house under any future circumstance. The house belongs to us. It will belong to Henry after us. There is no version of events, now or in the future, in which Connor or Eleanor's resentment translates into any actual claim on what Harold Bennett built and chose, deliberately, to leave in our care. That is the final, complete shape of how this story ends. Not with anger in the end, but with clarity, legal, absolute, undeniable clarity about exactly who this house belongs to, and exactly why two people were willing to destroy everything else in their family in pursuit of something they were never actually going to get.